I'm going to introduce myself, Patty Wong. I work for OEHHA. This is our section that do the study. So I'm going to start by providing an overview of the study. The OEHHA study has a multitask, so just trying to bring everyone's memory since it's been a year. The first task is we consult with communicate with the public, consult with the expert. In the past few years, we have been in constant communication with our panel. This is our third meeting. We have 3 meetings, including today. So we also have been in constant communication with federal agency, with European agency that are involved in TURF's crumb study. And also in the early stage of this study, we have a series of workshops which we communicate with public community stakeholder and to listen for the input. And then our next task is to look at and identify the chemical of interest and the hazard. So this is the step we have discussed in detail last year on how do we do the chemical compilation of the chemical list. And the next task is developing the exposure scenario. This task involves in looking at the pathway of exposure, identify the receptor category, and we work closely with our collaborator on this, and we will report some of the results today in one of the sections. The next task is the field characterization including playground and synthetic turf field. It also includes the chemical characterization of the material. So we work closely with our collaborator, and we are presenting some of the preliminary data today. The next task is biomonitoring and personal monitoring protocol. This step, we have a contract with the UC Berkeley to come up with the protocol. The last one is our risk assessment itself. At the end, we will have a report. At the conclusion of the study, we will release a report in 2019 to summarize the human health risk potential exposed to chemical on synthetic turf field and playground. So we are here today, as you see, we are May 2018, and we have almost every task ongoing and keep us very busy. So before we start, I would like to give you some overview on each task, how we work together, and what are the activity and the results, and how they relate to each other. So we start with the 5 tasks that I have just introduced, and we'll go down in detail. So the first one is the hazard identification. This involves in literature review to identify a list of chemicals that are tire related. And we have discussed in depth last year on the approach and name some of the chemical. It's still an ongoing process because based on the chemical database we generate, we are doing literature search to come up with the chemical property, chemical toxicity. So at the same time, last year we spent a lot of time on the road. In 2017, we teamed up with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, the scientists on my left side here. We travel across California. I call it an adventure. And we visit a lot of fields. So before we start, we had come up with a sampling strategy. And we put it up for the panel discussion last year. We get very good input. And we put it in place. We contact field owner, we recruit people, and we go onto the field. We sample for the environment. So I'm trying to see if the work. Oh yeah, it works. So we collect multimedia sample, which we'll go in detail later. But we use the established protocol that we discussed last year to sample. And this year, we are going to talk about the preliminary study. We're going to talk about the field summary, what we did. And then we also discuss the targeted and non-targeted chemical analysis process. based on what we discussed, we are, Dr. Medellina's group in Lawrence Berkeley lab are doing the analysis. So information come from the database, the chemical database here. We used it to guide our targeted analysis for the sample. And if we identify any non-targeted chemical, we add that chemical back to our chemical database. So that's how two of the tasks, how they relate to each other. And then once we get the chemical analysis going on, we start collecting chemical concentration in each of the media. And we are setting up a chemical concentration database. And next, at the same time, late last year and early this year, we have teamed up with scientists from University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley, and University of Arizona, UA. And we have proposed a time activity study last year to the panel, and we have a discussion on how we should approach. And we apply the protocol we have learned here, and we discuss in detail. So we do an online survey, and it has just been complete about 2 weeks ago. And then we have went out to the soccer game and practice the videotape player in games with different age, different gender. So today, hope the clicker work. Today we're going to talk about the pathway we have identified from the OEHHA staff and the receptor category that we are interested in for the discussion. And also we will present the preliminary data on our online survey for the panel to comment. So the data from the online survey is going to provide a feedback information to how we modify our pathway and our receptor. And further down, we're hoping that all the data, we will, not hope, we will use these data to compile, sorry, not yet, to compile activity parameter database that are specific for California and specific for soccer player. And for soccer activity, including coach and bystander. So we will use the video footage that are being decoded now in UA to feed the measured data to our database. And also we will look into literature to find any of the appropriate receptor-specific and pathway-specific parameter to enrich our database. And by using the database, we are going to compile with the chemical database here to estimate the multi-route exposure dose. So I don't want to shine anyone here. So we are going to estimate the exposure dose, and by looking at the cancer potency, the hazard reference dose, and also some of the dose response function, we're going to derive hazard. We're going to look at cancer risk. So we will characterize the human exposure and risk on synthetic turf field and playground. And then, we'll compile all the results and put it into our final report, the Human Health Risk Assessment Report for the turf field and the playground. And information collect from the concentration, from the chemical, and also from the activity, from the physical chemical property and exposure property is going to fit into the biomonitoring protocol development and the personal monitoring protocol development. So this completes the task of our study and the activity we anticipate could happen and how they relate. Okay, so Ladan, can you turn off the slide? So, Dr. Baum.
So at this point, I invite the panel members to have any questions if they have any questions for Patty's overview, to ask them now. And Mr. Avil.
So just one question. Thank you for the summary. You pointed and talked about the cancer dose sort of calculation on the health outcomes. But then there are, in fact, other health outcomes that you're also ascribing. So I don't want to lose sight of
Yes.
these other sort of non-cancer endpoints.
Yeah, the non-cancer hazard and the multiple endpoint that involved in the non-cancer hazard, definitely.
Do any other panel members have a question at this point?
I have a question, and thank you for putting this back up because the printed version is too small for me to read. But could you just? I don't know if I missed this or I might have missed this or forgotten it, and if so, I apologize. But how is the biomonitoring going to fit in exactly? I'm not quite understanding that.
Okay, for this particular study, we're going to use all the information we generate here and the data to come up with the protocol. So is the development of the protocol how if is needed, what kind of biomonitoring or what kind of personal monitoring procedure and detailed steps that might be involved. So it's not an actual study, it's a protocol development.
Okay, then maybe I didn't miss it or misunderstand it. So what, you're only going to do a protocol, but then what would the purpose of the protocol be if you're not actually going to execute it then?
Okay, for the time limit of the study, part of it, and the goal of this preliminary, the first step of the study, we are collecting information to support if the need and what kind of detail to do it. So just by doing the chemical analysis or the characterization, we are on to the third year already. So we are doing a step basis, and we're going to evaluate at the end what we find out in the field, what we find out in the exposure, how we're going to move forward if we need it. So we don't have a concrete idea, or I wouldn't say concrete idea. We don't have a design step path going down there, but we're developing the protocol and look at evaluate what is the next step if it's needed.
So let me see if I understand this correctly then. So for the purple box at the bottom corner, human health risk assessment report, you would then not expect to rely on any biomonitoring data for your to confirm your exposure estimates or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And this is because of time and resource constraints primarily, or because you don't think that you need that?
We don't know, I would say at this point. It's a step process. We try to do the best we can within the resources and time. If it's needed, I'm sure that we'll bring the panel back and you will listen to you what your suggestion is. We work on it as step basis. But I want also to bring up the attention, USCPA also are doing a similar study in parallel. So we are constantly communicating with each other and see what is the need and how we best approach it.
And I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just trying to understand the logic behind it because that's my job, right? You know.
Definitely.
So when you say if it would be needed, what would be something that would make it needed in your mind to the best that you can comment at this point in time?
I think I will wait until we have the chemical data at least come out, and I haven't seen all of them. I don't want to draw any conclusion before I even know what we are finding in our material. So I can't really have a guess on what's going to happen and how it's going to happen.
Dr. Sheldon?
In the past, we have tried to use biomonitoring to help verify the exposure measurements we've made. It's really quite tricky. If you can find the appropriate chemical, that the exposure is unique or high enough for kids playing on turf, it gives you the opportunity to sort of help close the loop. But you have to be very, very careful in the selection and the way that you conduct the study. But that, I think, would be one potential use, but I also warn against it a little because it can be quite difficult.
Mr. Abel?
Just because you opened the door about the EPA study, We're not going to have that discussion here, I don't think, because that report has not been released yet. You may have access to some of that, but I think that we ought to be careful about what information is and what the focus of that investigation is, because I think they may not be looking at exactly the same kinds of fields, et cetera, exposures, population that you are looking at here.
I totally agree. Sounds like you also have the insider information. I do not have access to the report, and we have been in communication with them. According to our discussion, their report should be coming out very soon. They are drafting the report. And I agree with you. From what we learned, they are not doing exactly what we're doing. There's some overlap, but with different approach, definitely. That makes the beauty of collaboration.
On that basic topic, you mentioned that there was a European Union effort too.
Yeah, and I forgot, actually. I lost my notes, so that's why I lost. The OEHHA, the European Chemical Agency, they did study and they also did a risk assessment in the past few years. We have been talking to them, and they are waiting for our data to update the risk assessment. So we're hoping to have more continued communication with them. And we also have nominated our chemical for NTP evaluation, and the report should be coming out very soon.
So Lauren pointed out that we're a minute over time. So can we move on to the next topic?